Well, I'm out here this morning in one of my favorite little food plots. It's only maybe a sixth of an acre, really small, but very, very effective. And I want to just talk today about food plots in general. And I want, before I dive into it, start with a couple of things. One, the reasons I do food plots, and two, maybe some of the misconceptions with food plotting in general. So first, I plant a lot of food plots every year, not just for myself, primarily for other people, other landowners or buddies or whatever. And so I get to see a lot of different areas, see how the deer respond to it, but also try it a lot of different ways. I don't own any big equipment personally. I sometimes have access to them depending on which properties I'm working on, but every year I still do food plots, more or less by hand or the poor man method. So there's a lot of ways that they can be done. And the primary reason that I plant food plots really isn't directly for the hunting. I oftentimes don't sit right on the food plots. I would rather be, back in the cover off of it. And if I look back at most of the big deer that I've killed over the years, very few of them have been right on food plots. So that's not the primary reason that I plan on. There's two reasons that I'd like to do it. One, I do think it helps keep the deer on and around your property more often and longer for longer periods throughout the entire year, not just popping in and out. But two, I truly enjoy the food plot process. It's a ton of work, but I love that sweat equity. Put in everything you can and see the reward. And for me, the reward is just watching, properties become more habitable by deer. The deer just enjoying spending time there, watching, the fawns this time of year. Enjoy food plots like this. It's cool to see, all your work and watch things grow. It's that small scale farming aspect to it that's truly addicting. And then I've enjoyed doing food plots so much that I'm now a part owner of a food plot seed company. So I'm ate up by this stuff. I put a ton of work into it every year. Again, more or less just because I enjoy it, not necessarily a direct benefit to the hunting. And the second thing I wanted to point out with regards to just food plots in general, I think there's this kind of misconception, or maybe a couple of them, that food plots are a rich man's game, or you need a lot of equipment to pull it off, or you need a lot of space to pull it off. And I can tell you from personal experience, year after year after year, that's not the case. Again, I don't own any big equipment myself. A lot of times, every year, even when I do have access to equipment, sometimes I think it's just easier to do it with just a backpack sprayer and a hand spreader. It can be very effective. So just knowing that, even if your situation isn't what you see on videos or shows or whatever, there's likely a spot that you could tuck in a little food plot and have it be a very effective little spot, even if it's not very big. The second thing I wanted to point out just with food plots in general is I think they kind of have this bad rep, especially if you haven't done it before. The term food plots kind of generates this negative connotation with, being a easier style of hunting or too much of an advantage or whatever. I have not seen that. Again, like I talked about, most of the big deer I've killed have not been on food plots. Um, I think that people that say that overlook the fun aspect of putting these in. If you haven't done it before, I said it before, but it's addicting. It's so fun. The experimentation of it, the trial and error of seeing what you can grow, seeing how the deer respond to it. That's my favorite part. And so if you just give it a try and kind of, look at it that way, you're improving the property, improving the health of your deer, the nutrition, whether it's a property you own or it's a permission piece or just a little corner of an ag field. Just try it. Get out there. It's fun to put some effort back into the land and just see the results and the benefit from it. So like I said, I'm going to talk about food plotting in general, and I'm going to keep that pretty high level. Food plots are certainly something you can get really into the weeds on, and depending on your situation, your resources, your time, your knowledge, and trying to cover it all is just not possible. It'd be like saying, tell me everything you know about deer hunting in one short video. You just can't do it. So I'm going to focus on appealing to those guys that are a little bit newer to the food plot game, things to keep in mind, and also tailored to the guys that don't have access to big equipment. Like I said, every year I plant food plots with minimal equipment, and you don't know the difference. I mean, this food plot seed, the deer don't know if this plot was planted with a weed eater or a $60,000 tractor. I mean, it's certainly one of those things that one takes more effort than the other, but the end result is the exact same. So just talk about some of those things, and just certain steps that you need to keep in mind throughout this whole process. Obviously, with food plotting, just like agricultural crops, there are environmental factors that play a critical role. And so one of those that I would categorize there is the location and the soil. So you got to think about a couple of things. One, your seed needs to have good soil contact with the dirt. And then the dirt itself has to have the proper nutrients to facilitate that seed. So that includes your fertilizer, your lime. And so one of the very first steps that should not be overlooked when planting a new food plot is getting a soil test, so you know exactly what to put down for fertilizer and lime to change that pH level. If you skip that step, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage. Soil tests are pretty easy to do and pretty cheap. And at the end of the day, they're likely going to pay for themselves. So you're not putting down fertilizer and nutrients that the soil does not need. The other thing with the location is how much sunlight is it getting. Um, Almost everything needs sunlight to be able to grow. There are certain species within the food plot category that do better in shaded areas than others. This plot is relatively shaded, and that's why this combination of clover and chicory does well here. But it still needs some sunlight. So don't pick a spot that's in the middle of the woods with a tall tree canopy that just shades everything out pretty much all day. Depending on how much sunlight a spot gets can dictate which seed you use. But again, you need to choose a spot that at least gets some sunlight, 4+ hours per day of sunlight. The other big environmental factor that is out of our control is rainfall. Obviously, everything you're planting is going to need moisture to be able to germinate and continue to grow. And while you can't control that, you can somewhat control the timing of when you do things. So, like for example, we'll take fall plots, fall food plots that are planted late in the summer. I give myself a pretty big calendar window, basically a month, of when I want to try to get that seed on the ground. But I'm going to look at the forecast to pick the actual day. I'm not planning by a calendar date at that point. I'm planning by the rain forecast. If I see one or especially two rains in the forecast, I'm going to get out and get that seed down, because if you miss some of those rains, or you plant after the rains and you're just broadcasting seed, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. So rainfall, again, out of our control, but if you can work on the timing of when you put the seed down or when you put fertilizer down, you can really benefit from those timely rains. So talking about different seed varieties and how to choose the right one for your situation, one of the things that I really learned as an important lesson over the years, and then especially as I got into the seed industry, is that there's a big variance in seed quality across the board. Just like any other product category, right? You have your low quality, cheaper, more generic seeds. Then you also have your newer, improved varieties that have better characteristics, such as better drought tolerance or heat tolerance, or better can take browse pressure better and regenerate and grow back more quickly. All those types of things. And then also within seed blends, there are certain things that make sense and grow well together and pair well together from a deer nutrition standpoint and a deer attraction standpoint. And then there are some out there where it just looks like everything got thrown in a bag, and it's a big variety of stuff, but none of it really grows well together. Some of it is more aggressive and takes over. So trying your best. It can be overwhelming, but trying your best to understand what you're buying. Are you buying a seed off the shelf that, you know, you can't actually look up the seed species? It says VNS, variety not stated. You know, that's going to be your more common, basic, you know, kind of not knowing what you're going to get type of seed. Or are there actual names you can look up and you know, find studies on and data and reviews and stuff like that? So just be aware of what you're purchasing for the seed itself. The price difference between your cheaper seed and your higher quality seed is usually not that much, at least not enough to where it's worth opting for the cheaper seed and hoping for the best. You're better off buying the better seed and at least not putting yourself at a disadvantage right away. In choosing the right seed, you have to think about your situation, and especially two things. One, your deer density, but more importantly, your plot size. So again, I mentioned this one's like a sixth of an acre. I would say anything a quarter acre and less, you really have to factor in the amount of food you're going to put in that spot and the deer browse pressure. So there are a couple of things that do well. My first choice would be a clover chicory mix like this. In that situation, it provides a ton of forage in a small area. You can kind of look around here and see how much food there is. The deer can't over browse it. It regenerates really quickly, and again, it just does well in a small area. The next choice would be some type of brassica blend that also provides a lot of forage. That is a little bit higher risk of being browsed out in a small plot like that, quarter acre or less, but most likely you can get it past the deer, and those big leafy forages produce a lot of food in a small acreage. So those are probably the two my personal best choices in a small plot, a quarter acre or less. Now anything bigger than a quarter of an acre up to an acre or even an acre and a half, you start to get a little more room to play and a few more choices. Actually anything an acre or bigger, I like to have diversity, and usually we'll split the plot in half in some capacity depending on, you know, where a stand is located and where I'll draw that line. But if you have, let's say, an acre to work with, you can really get creative and you can really offer the deer a lot within that acreage, within that 1 acre, with two different types of food. Maybe it's a half clover chicory, half brassica blend. You can rotate those year after year, but you have a lot more choices in a situation like that. And once you start getting an acre and a half and bigger, it really opens up your options to include grains as well. So maybe you can have a soybean food plot or a corn plot or a sorghum plot. It's really, really hard to grow less than an acre and a half or an acre of those grains because the deer just don't let them get to maturity. They get browsed so hard during the growth stages, especially corn and soybeans. That you really need a bigger acreage or something that you can, you know, put electric fence around to keep the deer out during the growth stage. But in my experience, anything less than an acre and a half is just not worth putting into grains. I'm going to opt for what I would call a green combination. Like I said, your brassicas or your clover chicories. Okay, so you have your spot picked out, and the first step is going to be to get rid of the existing vegetation. And there's a couple of ways you can do that, but the primary way is to use chemical and spray it and kill that off. You can do it with a backpack sprayer. I use a backpack sprayer all the time on these little plots. You could use, you know, an ATV sprayer, tractor sprayer. Sometimes if it's really tall vegetation, it helps to mow it off first before you get in there. You just get a better kill with the spray on the smaller stuff that may be growing up in between the taller stuff. So, you know, keep it a manageable size before you spray it. And then you'll want to find some way to get rid of that dead thatch once it dies off. If you have a disc or a tiller, you can do that. I've burned it off with fire. That dead vegetation, you know, burns off pretty quickly. Just keep in mind a couple of things. When you're clearing a plot, let's say you disc it up or till it or even burn it, a lot of times you're regenerating new seed. Um, and when you're regenerating new weed seed like that, sometimes it's best to, let's say you disc or till or prep the soil, let whatever wants to grow back start coming back for 10, 12 days, then spray it again before you plant the seed that you want in there. It'll just keep you from having to fight weeds that are growing with your food plot. You'll be limited with what you can spray and when. Sometimes it's just easier to let that regenerate, kill it off, then plant the seed that you're wanting. If the spot that you picked out isn't super heavy with vegetation, I've done it plenty of times where I've just taken my backpack sprayer and sprayed and seeded at the same day. So because I'm not disturbing the soil, I'm really not regenerating new weed seed. So I'll take and just spray it, broadcast my seed, and that dead vegetation kind of, as it dies, it kind of folds over that seeds and actually does a good job of keeping moisture down on the ground that those seeds can utilize. So I've been very effective with that. Certainly you're not going to get the perfect germination out of just broadcasting seed without prepping a nice seed bed, but you can certainly get good enough. And again, that's about as minimal as it gets: a backpack sprayer and a broadcast seeder, a hand seeder. I just did one a few weeks ago in a new plot, and it's already coming up. The clover chicory is already coming up, and that'll fill in really nicely, and very few weeds that have regerminated just because I didn't bother the soil. If you do have access to a tiller or a disc, you can get a really nice seed bed. And my ideal method there is, if you, let's say, use a tiller, till it up, get that soil, nice and soft. And most of these small seeds that we're talking about, your clovers, your chicories, your brassicas, they're very small, very small. So you do not want them very deep, quarter inch or less, really. And so you don't want to till really deep, otherwise you're going to have really fluffy, fine soil that seed is going to get compacted down deeper. So just a nice light till, and ideally, if you have a cultipacker, you run over the entire thing with the cultipacker, then seed, and then cultipack again to really get that good seed to soil contact. That's very, very important. And if you don't have a cultipacker, you can use your ATV tires. You can use a lawn roller, a lot of different options there. But if you can just press that seed down into the soil rather than just letting it sit on top of it, especially a softer soil, if you can press it down a little bit, that seed to soil contact is going to make a big difference. In fact, I've seen it where, there were times where I didn't have access to something to press it down, and just my tire tracks or even my foot tracks, that's what germinated the best and came up the quickest compared to the seed that was just sitting on top of the soil. So again, ideal method, if you have access to all that equipment, is to disc or till, then cultipack, then seed, then cultipack a second time. That's going to result in really good germination for your food plots. Real quick, we'll touch on fertilizer. Ideally, like I said earlier, you get a soil test done, so you get your fertilizer recommendations. And the best time, in my mind, if you can apply the fertilizer at the same time that you're disking and incorporate that fertilizer into the soil, that's going to be the best, because with certain fertilizers, your nitrogen especially, you can have some volatilization of it, to where you're losing some of it as it sits on the ground, especially the hot sunny days. But if you can incorporate it into the soil, you significantly decrease that, but you also increase the utility of the seed using it if it's worked in the soil. If you don't work in the soil, you're really relying on rainfall to do that for you. Again, the timeliness of it, you want to spread your fertilizer. If you're not going to incorporate it in the soil before planting, you want to time it before it rains so that the rain can kind of work that fertilizer into the ground. So like I said, best time to do that is at planting or right before planting. I've done it where I've went and done it after planting too, just before rainfall. The other thing as well is once those plants get up a little bit, like let's use a brassica plot for example. Once it's up and germinated, you got a few inches of growth, those brassicas really like nitrogen. You can go top dress just to give it a little extra boost of like a urea, which is straight nitrogen. You can broadcast that before a rain and really give those plants a boost as they start to grow and really fill out. The other thing you can do that really helps out, especially on a year that has drought conditions or a lot of heat, and you're not getting that rain to be able to broadcast fertilizer prior to, is you can use a foliar fertilizer, which is basically something you spray just on the leaves themselves. That's what's going to absorb it. It doesn't have to be worked into the ground or anything. So your food plot's up, but it needs a shot of fertilizer. There are water soluble options out there, or there's just straight liquid fertilizers you can run through a backpack sprayer. I do that almost every year on my food plots. I'll go out and especially in the mornings, I'll go out and spray the leaves with a water soluble fertilizer and just give them a nice extra boost, especially when we're not getting that rain that we need. When it comes to maintenance on food plots, it's certainly not a plant and forget and just show up in October. You expect to have a great food plot to hunt over. There's some maintenance involved, and it depends on what you've planted. So the brassicas, your maintenance would be the fertilizer option that I talked about. If you need to, let's say you get a lot of grass coming up in it, there are chemical options that are grass selective. So like a clethodim that you can go spray the whole food plot with, and it's not going to hurt anything but the grasses that are coming up. So weed control and fertilizer are the probably main things to think about with a brassica plot. With clovers, it's somewhat similar, but you also have the option of mowing. Clover plots like to be mowed at least once or twice a year. Clover chicory plots, you're gonna the main reason is to get rid of some of the annual weeds that are coming up. Again, you can spray the clethodim for grasses. There are some chemical options to take care of the broadleaves within a clover plot too. But that's kind of what you're looking at from a maintenance standpoint is mowing, fertilizer, and weed control. So again, a very quick overview of food plots, and there's so much more to consider and take into factor, but um, that can at least provide you a starting point. And think about things like location, and don't be afraid to experiment with different spots, different shapes. Don't just take a rectangle or think about how you shape your food plots. Try different mixes of things. See how the deer respond. Again, I can't emphasize enough that that's where the fun part is. That's what makes all of this process fun, is learning and trying things and seeing how the deer respond. And again, don't be intimidated by it either. Like I said, there's a ton to cover, but if you just keep the basics in mind and also understand that you don't need a lot, you can plant food plots with, like I said, a backpack sprayer, seeder, a broadcast hand seeder, a leaf blower, a weed eater, fire, all these things that are pretty minimal tool wise. You can get a really good looking food plot established and provide yourself a nice little hunting spot, or just provide the deer extra incentive to stay on and around your property. So the final thing I want to say is don't be afraid to reach out to myself or other resources. I've partly got into the food plot industry to be able to help people get into it or become better food plotters. So please know I'm available if I can help with your specific situation and getting into food plots. I enjoy that process and I enjoy that part of it. But if you haven't tried it before, the biggest thing I can say is just try it, give it a shot. And I think you'll find yourself in a situation like me where you become addicted to it, and you become addicted to the work of it and the experimentation of it. So best of luck out there. Reach out if I can help.